My name is Linda Ridenauer. I'm here for PortsmouthCityWatch.org. We are wanting to interview the candidates for Commonwealth Attorney. I'm a longtime resident here, been involved in civic work, so we would like to make sure everybody who's going to vote in February gets to hear and see the candidates that are running.
Hi, my name is Allie Sprinkle, and I am one of the 3 candidates that are running for Commonwealth Attorney. I am a lawyer here in Portsmouth. I've been a lawyer since 2002, and I'm happy to be here today to speak to this group so everybody will get a perspective from each candidate.
And I'm Terry Danaher, and I'm also here with Portsmouth City Watch, and looking forward to interviewing all the candidates for Commonwealth Attorney, especially starting today, and we're ready to roll, I think.
I would just, if it's okay, I would like to go through, just give you an idea of the categories, not the questions, but the categories that we'll probably be getting questions from.
Okay.
We're going to work with the resume questions, you know, education and experience.
Yes, ma'am.
Job requirement questions for a Commonwealth Attorney. And then we have some focus questions which will deal with your ability to carry out your job description.
Okay. Sounds great.
So I'll let Ms. Danaher start with the first question.
Well, obviously you went to law school,
Yes, ma'am.
and there was an interesting bit in the Currents this week that mentioned that you went to law school in Florida.
I did.
Could you tell us a little bit about your experience there and what it is about that school in particular that attracted you, and how you think that prepared you for what you're doing now and would like to do in the Commonwealth Attorney's Office?
Okay. The school is called Nova Southeastern University. It's in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I had a wonderful experience there. The reason I chose that school, I had looked at many schools kind of in the area in Virginia. A friend of mine was actually attending school there, and that's how I even knew about it. I didn't really know about it, so I thought that I would apply and take a look there. Well, to my surprise, they offered me a scholarship. So that's one of the main reasons I went there. And of course, I thought it would be a great opportunity to, you know, live somewhere else other than, because I had born and raised here, and I went to UVA, so I thought it would be a great experience to go to another state and live. I think it prepared me very well. Oftentimes I say law school doesn't necessarily prepare you to be a lawyer. It prepares you to think like a lawyer. But another thing, this is one thing that did attract me to this school. I knew in this school, your last year or your last semester in law school, you have the opportunity to do a clinic. And at this particular law school, one of their clinics was in criminal law, and one of their sites was at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Norfolk, Virginia. So that was something that drew me there, because I thought my last semester of law school I could come back home and I could work here.
Mm-hmm.
And I did do that. I worked at the United States Attorney's Office for my last semester of law school. I got my last bit of credit, and I got firsthand real-world trial experience there.
Okay, thank you.
What led you to this position or seeking this position?
Part of it goes back to my last semester in law school. You know, my father's been a lawyer for probably going on 40 years now. I always practice here in Portsmouth, so I certainly have always been interested in government and the law. I knew that I would always have the opportunity to practice with him, but, you know, I wanted to make my own way. When I went to the U.S. Attorney's Office and did the clinic there, I really enjoyed that experience. That was prosecutorial experience. I worked on a very big, it was a drug conspiracy case, but, you know, in the federal system, you bring in murders that occurred during that conspiracy, and I worked on that trial. I actually stayed after my clinic. They allowed me to stay on because the trial lasted for well over a month, and it was still going on when my clinic was over, but I stayed on because it was a trial from Portsmouth. It's actually a drug conspiracy that had occurred in Portsmouth. And I really enjoyed the prosecutorial side. I wasn't sure that I would, but I loved it. And at that point I got to meet some police officers from Portsmouth, and I thought that that was the path I wanted to take. I knew I could get a lot of experience, and I knew I could certainly help the community by being a prosecutor. So that's what led me to seek a job in prosecution. I applied to several offices, and luckily for me, Mr. Mobley had just recently won, and he was looking to hire some new people, and I was able to come in right with Mr. Mobley when he took office in 2002.
Ah, that's good. That kind of leads to a question that I have, and we'll kind of be going back and forth on all this, but how familiar are you, how long did you work for him? I guess that
I
would be
worked for
nice.
him. I started work, he went in January 2002, and I came right in. So I was there from January of 2002 till May of 2006, so almost 4.5 years.
Yeah. And what were the things that you tended to work on most during that time?
You know, I've answered some questions about this before. When Earl first came in, or I apologize, I should say Judge Mobley now. When he first came in, you know, he was new, obviously, to that position, and I was probably the least experienced person, because he really had brought in some experienced people, and he kept a lot of people that were there. But he wanted me to just get in there, and I mean, within the first week I was trying cases. Now, obviously I wasn't trying major cases my first week, but I was trying misdemeanors, trespasses, things of that nature my first week. So I was kind of thrown in, and I didn't really focus on any one particular type of case. He put me in GDC, which is the General District Court, which, you know, does all types of crimes. He put me in J&D, so I kind of rotated all around. Actually, in the juvenile, J&D is Juvenile and Domestic Relations Court. In that court, I actually got some pretty serious cases. I had, you know, shooting, you know, domestic violence stuff, shootings. I had one case I did, it was pretty high profile, where the young lady left her baby. I got that case from juvenile court, and that was pretty early in my career. But of course, over time, I ended up doing every type of case: malicious wounding, rapes, robberies. I worked on murders there. So I didn't really have a particular focus. He did split up at one time into, like, he had a drug team, but he basically had a drug team. Other offices have like a violent crimes, white collar crimes, drug team, but Mr. Mobley didn't do that. He kind of wanted everybody to know everything, which was wonderful for me, because I got to try every type of case: drug distribution, violent felonies, simple misdemeanors, which are important too.
Well, having said that, what, if anything, would you like to see changed, if anything? Or do you think that the way he organized it would be the way you would go, or would you have to see who's still there and who you'd have to hire and that sort of thing?
I would probably evaluate it at the time. I kind of do like the idea, though, of certain teams. I would like everybody to be able, I don't want to have one person who does misdemeanors and they wouldn't be able to go in and try a felony, or I wouldn't want one person working on violent crimes and they wouldn't know how to work a fraud case. I would certainly like for everyone to know how to do things. That's why hopefully I will have experienced people that are there that maybe aren't as experienced, get the proper training, because that was something that was great for me. I had great training while I was there. Judge Ottinger was actually my mentor when I was there. He was the chief deputy. So I had a lot of very experienced people that trained me. But I do like the idea of there being a drug team, because drugs have always, unfortunately, been a problem in Portsmouth, and I think they continue to be so. So I would certainly try and get that back together. They don't necessarily have that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
That was something I would like to work on. And of course, there is a dedicated J&D team, and that's not something I would change, because there's a lot different procedures and things of that nature for juveniles. And so
Right.
I think having people who know what's going on in that particular court is important. I certainly would not change that.
Thank you.
Is it possible to ask for you to pick one of the cases that you worked on and go through the steps of what you had to do then to take it on into court, and how it turned out? Was it frustrating, or was it just a challenge and you were successful or you weren't? You know, just without naming names, just
Right.
to...
Wow. I tried so many over the 4.5 years because I really did get in there and try so much. The one particular case I spoke about where the young lady left her baby, and that was felony child neglect. That was a pretty serious case from the beginning. It was, you had to deal with the media, high profile. But we had the facts. We had video. We had witnesses. Doctor luckily found the child. She had ended up leaving the child in the yard of a doctor who happened to find the child. So when you get a case from the police officers, who typically do a very good job, but sometimes you have to go beyond what their case file is, talking to the witnesses. Obviously they've talked to them, got a little interview, but you have to meet with them, talk to them. You have to make sure you have all the appropriate witnesses. For example, with the video, if the police officers hand you the video, that's not the only thing you need when you go to court. You need the person who is the record keeper for the video. You need to know every witness that you need to prove that case, and that was a case where we needed everyone, because in that case the video showed her just before she left to fly to another state, and she left her baby. She was buying cat food to make sure her cats were fed, but had left her child in the yard. So things like that were important for us to show.
How long does a case like that take to gather everything you need to go to court?
Well, hopefully, the police officers will get you the majority of what you need. And, there are time limits on when you have to try somebody, depending on whether or not they're in custody, which is a very important part of your job, to make sure you get the cases tried in the appropriate amount of time and to give the defendant their due process, and that you don't violate speedy trial. Hopefully, when you get everything from the police officers, you have what you need. But you may require a little more time for you to prepare the case, talk to the witnesses. Normally when the person is arrested, the preliminary hearing is, they try and set them within about a month. And within that time frame, you need to make sure you're prepared to have the preliminary hearing.
How about your first case? Were you scared?
Yes, of course I was. I was nervous, but luckily, having done my clinic over at the U.S. Attorney's Office, and that trial, that big drug conspiracy trial I spoke about, I was fortunate enough, they allowed me to question a couple witnesses there in federal court, which is very formal. I believe there were 4 co-defendants, so there were 4 defense attorneys. But I questioned a couple witnesses in that case, so that, of course, gave me a little bit of confidence. And I had, as I said, the first week I was probably trying cases, but I had gone, when I started, I went and watched. So I was very nervous, but, I think I was prepared to do it.
Very good.
Getting back just for a minute to the juvenile courts, we have an organization here, Friends of the Juvenile Court, and I'm sure you're aware of them. What do you think should be the relationship between the Commonwealth Attorney's Office, given that the whole idea of that court is to help these young people stay out of the system in the future?
Yes. Well, I think that is an important role for the Commonwealth Attorney. In my opinion, the goal of the Commonwealth Attorney is not to convict everyone and to keep people in the system. It's to evaluate the cases and to work with the juvenile system for the juveniles. It's set up to help them, to help rehabilitate them, to catch them before they become unproductive adults or adults with criminal histories. That is certainly one area, I think, where the Commonwealth Attorney can help people. There's more resources in the juvenile court. There's more programs for juveniles, like Friends of the Juvenile Court. Unfortunately, sometimes in the adult system, somebody may need help, but if there's not the resources, there's nothing we can do but prosecute the case, and whatever sentence they end up getting is what they get. But luckily in the juvenile system, there's more programs. So I think that there should be, the relationship should be a good one, and they should both work together to help rehabilitate juveniles that can be. Unfortunately, and I've been in juvenile court, there are some that have worse records than many adults I've seen. And, those, you might not always be able to help them or get them a program. I mean, they may just have to be sentenced to the Department of Juvenile Justice or tried as an adult. Because there's many juveniles that commit violent crimes.
How do you make the decision, or what are the guidelines for trying a juvenile as an adult?
Well, in the statute, there's certain,
Gives you the guidelines?
there's guidelines and there's certain things, and you don't have to automatically try them as an adult. You take into certain considerations, and the statute lists those. For example, their prior history, their age, any prior trouble in school, their family history, things of that nature. And of course, the statute, certain crimes are like, these are the type of crimes where you can try them as an adult. Not all crimes you try them as an adult, but there are certain crimes where these are the ones you can try them as an adult.
You don't necessarily have to. But
You don't necessarily have to. Another thing, even sometimes when you try a juvenile as an adult, when they get up into circuit court, one thing, they may get this adult conviction and be tried as an adult, but they can still be sentenced as a juvenile and get some of the help that's necessary for them. So,
Well, along a personal line, not along a big person, but what do you think, what are your strengths or weaknesses that you bring to this job? Personal strengths and weaknesses that make for success or failure?
hopefully I don't bring many weaknesses, if any. My strengths are the fact that I have worked at the U.S. Attorney's Office. I learned a lot there. I've worked in the Portsmouth Commonwealth Attorney's Office, not just any Commonwealth Attorney, this particular office that I'm seeking to run. I was there for many years. I've also practiced criminal defense law, which I think is very important to help you when you're a Commonwealth attorney, because as a prosecutor you need to be able to evaluate the case, and part of evaluating the case is knowing what the criminal defense attorney is going to bring up, is knowing the weaknesses of the case. So I think having experience on both sides is one of the biggest things that I bring to the table. Also here working with my father, and we've run this law firm. I've been here since '06 up until now, and I'm still working here. When I came, as I said, my dad had been practicing almost 40 years, and he was sick of the office management part of it, and he said, thank goodness you're here, and now you get to do that, which I have done. So I've helped run and manage this office, dealt with the finances, dealt with the employees, the personnel matters. Now, we don't have, obviously, as many as the Commonwealth Attorney, but I certainly have that experience, because part of the Commonwealth Attorney's job is managing that office and all the employees and the budget. So those are all things that I bring to the table. Those are the things you need. I think not having experience on both sides is a weakness, but that's, I do have the experience.
So from 2006 until now, what is the primary, is there a primary type of case that your law firm does, or do you
Well,
do
my
almost
firm is a general practice, but my particular area is criminal defense.
Mm-hmm.
I do other types of cases. I do custody, I do family law, I do divorce, but my main cases are criminal defense cases. I'm also a guardian ad litem for children, which kind of gives you experience in custody, family law, but also criminal matters as well. You deal with removals and things of that nature, which often coincide with criminal charges.
Yeah.
So that's something else that I have been doing. I'm not sure the exact amount of years that I've been a guardian ad litem, but it's been several years.
Do you think there would be any problem with other people in the Commonwealth Attorney's Office now that you've been practicing on the other side as the enemy? I mean, what kind of relationship do you think you would have with people who have been opposite you in court?
It is an adversarial position when you're a criminal defense attorney and prosecutor in court. Majority of people, have a very cordial relationship with. Obviously not when you're in court. So I think that my relationship with the people that I would work with, the people that are there, is a good one. Some of the people that are there are people that were there when I was there, especially some of the staff members. So I don't think having been in an adversarial position professionally is going to hurt when I go over. I don't have hard feelings towards anybody or anything of that nature.
Okay, that's, as the layperson is always looking at these court situations and thinking, you see attorneys arguing with each other, and then they're out in the hall talking and going to lunch, and it's sort of, I wondered how that would affect, a long-term kind of relationship. So, thank you.
Well, everyone, and even as a prosecutor, obviously, as you may guess, I have many friends that practice criminal defense law, but that certainly will have nothing to do with the job I do. I know you're my friend, that's not going to have anything to do with how I do my job as a Commonwealth attorney.
We've had some questions come in
Okay.
from the community,
Okay.
and specific to a certain crime or area, but
Okay.
what is your position on the death penalty? And why?
Okay. There are certain crimes that I think the death penalty should apply to. Fortunately, we haven't had too many here in Portsmouth, but some crimes are so heinous that it requires you charge capital murder, which of course would include part of the penalty would be the death penalty. And part of the job as a Commonwealth attorney is to evaluate each case, each situation, each defendant differently. If I felt as though there was a crime so heinous that deserved the death penalty to be sought, I would do so. But again, it's hard to answer.
Well,
It's not-
something like that's left up to the judge or the jury or
Yes.
those
But-
people.
But whether or
even
not,
though you-
but when you're charging,
Mhm.
whether or
Right.
not you charge capital, which would include the death
Mhm.
penalty, that's a decision the Commonwealth attorney can make. Of course,
Right.
whoever is the fact finder, whether it be a judge or jury, if it was a capital murder, I'm assuming it would be a jury, they do make the ultimate decision. So, but whether or not to seek it,
Right.
is with the Commonwealth attorney.
Well, in capital cases, the victim is obviously not there to be a witness.
Yeah.
But there are cases, domestic violence cases, for instance, which you mentioned yourself, where there are witnesses and they're victims already, and they're afraid
Yes.
of the system itself sometimes, and they're afraid that if they come forward and the system fails them, they will be in worse shape than they were before the whole thing started. So how, as the Commonwealth attorney, would you try to address that particular kind of situation, which is unfortunately pretty common?
Very common. When I practice in juvenile court, and even now as a criminal defense attorney, if you just go sit in juvenile court, victims are not, defendants' cases in juvenile court for domestic violence are being dropped all the time because the victims, they are scared at the time, but then they don't communicate with the Commonwealth attorney, or they say they don't remember, they change their mind. So that's a huge problem. I think the way I would like to deal with that is to get some better training of the Commonwealth attorneys and some of the victim witness people in speaking to those victims and reaching out to them and letting them know the resources they have, because it is very scary. Oftentimes they depend on, the alleged abuser. So that's why they're scared. And it might not even be that they're scared, it might be that they have nowhere else to go or they have no other resources. So having people in my office, the victim witness program that's in the office, and they are always there in juvenile court to speak to the witnesses and the victims, letting them know, let the victims know that we're here to support them, I think is an important part. You often see, and sometimes the only way you can get a conviction in the case is the victims, and as you say, they're kind of victimized again, are threatened about you have to come to court, and they're not spoken to appropriately, I think. So that's something I'd like to work on, and it's hard. That's a fine line, because you don't want to just say, okay, you don't worry about coming, we'll just drop the charge. But at the same time, you don't want to re-victimize them and make them feel as though you're bullying them as the prosecutor.
How do you deal with the police in this situation? Because I know from experience, not my own personal, no domestic violence in my background yet, but there are on occasion situations in the neighborhood where we have actually heard someone through the windows threatened, next door, and I know that the police tend to be so careful, and rightly so, because they don't want to intrude on a situation that is nothing, and at the same time, it's their job to go into these situations. So I would imagine that your office would have to cooperate and work together. Is there some kind of special training, or would you kind of sponsor some kind of special, what would you do?
Well, that's interesting because one thing I would really like to work on, and I have a good relationship with a lot of the police officers. That's actually some of the work I do. I work with police officers on grievance matters, on shootings that they've been involved in because, they do criminal investigations when an officer-involved shooting occurs. And I've been a lawyer for several police officers, so I have a good relationship with, and I've talked to several of them that I would like the Commonwealth Attorney's Office to be more involved in their training because they're really not involved, which I think is unfortunate because it's kind of like law school. The police officers go to the academy, they get the training, but the real world situation of policing and court is not always something you learn just by, going to class.
Yeah.
So I think having the Commonwealth attorneys more involved in the training, maybe giving training sessions. I've actually been involved. Some of the police officers, when they're new, they do like a mock trials for them and mock training. I go and do that as a defense attorney. I did it as a prosecutor. There are other defense attorneys that do that. But it's often a last minute thing. They say, hey, can you be there? And, I think it should be more cooperative and more organized. And I think that the police officer would be much more prepared when they're in court as well as when they go and respond to situations like that. And of course they have particular training for things like that as well, and hopefully they're attending that.
Here's one that's close to my heart. I'll read it slowly so you can think lengthy on it.
Okay.
How does Commonwealth Attorney deal with cases of official misconduct between elected officials, say a council and a school board, interfering with the running of city departments and the freedom of information, open meeting violations? Is that a part of something that you do have to deal with?
Well, obviously the main job of the Commonwealth Attorney is to investigate, charge, and try criminal offenses. So certainly if something of that nature had a criminal element to it, then you would be involved in that and you'd have to investigate it. Now that may be it's being investigated by another agency. They consult with a Commonwealth Attorney because it's not always that the police bring charges, obviously, especially for something like that.
Yeah.
That's something that would likely be investigated by a particular agency and or a grand jury. People probably come to the Commonwealth Attorney all the time with issues and things. If you're not sure and you want to investigate, they do have the right to do a special grand jury to investigate and determine whether or not there is a criminal element to it. And if there is a criminal element, then it would be my job as a Commonwealth Attorney to prosecute. But that's if and only if there was some criminal element to what occurred. I know public perception may sometimes be different than what is legally a crime or not a crime. So.
No.
Well, I was going to say, the Virginia Code, which guides most of these elected official agencies, that's breaking the law, and citizens, citizens are able, if they understand that that's been done, to come to you for investigation. Is that how it works?
Yes, they can certainly come to the Commonwealth Attorney and say, look, I believe a crime is occurring here and I'd like for you to investigate. Now, that might not mean, okay, let me do a special grand jury. That might
Right.
be, let me
Look into it.
Speak to either the police department. Sometimes you bring in the state police on things where who knows, something may be going on with the police department. You have to get a different agency. But yes, the citizens, if they think laws are being broken, they can certainly come to the Commonwealth Attorney. And I know, even as a criminal defense attorney, we have clients that have come and said, hey, I tried to call this detective, nobody's calling me back, they don't think there's a crime. And based on what they tell me, I disagree, and I've given them the Commonwealth Attorney's number. I said, this is another avenue for you. You need to go to them because, police officers have a hard job. They normally do a great job, but they don't know all the laws.
Right.
They're not lawyers. They didn't go to law school. So, sometimes they may think there's nothing to something when there really is.
These questions have led to I have kind of a two-pronged question for you. And if you get stuck in here somewhere, I will add, another point or whatever. I was looking at your resume, as I said, and at your law school in particular, because it was very interesting to me. I have a daughter in Miami, what can I say? But the school has a very good reputation. But one of the things that it has recently had is basically a ranking as one of the top schools in diversity of student population and faculty. And I was wondering if when you were there that was a similar situation and how that might feed into your working in a place where diversity is obviously is something very important here. And that leads to my second question, which is, again, when we're dealing with questions of diversity and people feeling that different groups are treated differently within the law and by the law, and grand juries, since we were talking about the grand jury situation, where you have people disappointed in the process and how a grand jury is used and can be used and misused. So putting all these things together, if you go back to your school
Okay.
and talk about how that may impact your ability to deal with such a diverse population, and then your feelings about using grand juries and the best way to deal with grand jury issues, I'd appreciate kind of your addressing that.
I would agree that my law school was a diverse law school when I went there. There were people from all over the country, all different races, ages, ethnicities. So it was a very diverse place, and of course South Florida in and of itself is a very diverse place, so I really enjoyed that experience. I do think that would help me, but not only in my law school, but throughout my life, I think I've been exposed to all different cultures, all different people, and that will certainly help in the Commonwealth attorney. To me, every case is a separate case. Every case is different. You have to evaluate it based on the facts of each and every case. Grand juries, going back to that, some of the more recent things where there have been grand juries, when a Commonwealth attorney decides to charge someone, they don't always go through a grand jury. That's the way they went in Missouri and New York, but you don't always have to have a grand jury. I mean, oftentimes it's the Commonwealth attorney. They look at it. If they think a crime has been committed, then they'll indict without a grand jury investigation. But sometimes when they're unsure or they think there may be something and they think they need a grand jury, they will, of course, bring in a grand jury to make a decision. So the citizens have made a decision. So, to me, you don't always need a grand jury. I mean, I think that's what people think, and it's different in every state. I'm comparing to other states. There's certainly been many charges here in Portsmouth where there's not been a grand jury. It's just been where Mr. Mobley, or I'm sure before him, Mr. Bullock, brought charges without having a grand jury. But that is another tool. But the Commonwealth attorney doesn't have to use that tool, but that's another tool that they can, in fact, use.
Is there a situation where you would feel very strongly that a grand jury should, what kind of situation, I guess is what I'm asking, would you say, in your opinion, not looking at anybody else's, but in your opinion, would warrant the use of a grand jury?
Well, there's of course the special grand jury, which we've seen here in Portsmouth. That's to investigate, to determine whether or not there may be any wrongdoing, and then you can decide whether or not to indict the charges. Then of course there's and that would be what you would use to decide to charge. I think it would probably be on cases where the facts are maybe in dispute, the facts, you're unsure of what legal charges should be made. I wouldn't always say, I feel like at least in the news lately it's been controversial cases, and I don't agree that it should always be controversial cases, because I think as a Commonwealth attorney, you're going to have to make tough choices, and in my opinion, you shouldn't always lay it on the lap of the citizens, I guess to say, because you should be able to make those decisions on your own.
Mm-hmm.
And if you evaluate a case, no matter how upset the public is or what the public perception is, if there's no crime, then there's no crime. If there is one, and you're charging, whether it be a police officer, an official, then that's your duty, and that's your job, and you have to do it. So, it depends.
Right.
It really does depend on the situation. But I feel as though that hopefully when I'm the Commonwealth attorney, that I'll be able to make a decision of whether or not a crime has been committed and whether or not someone should be charged.
You've been very, very generous in answering all our questions. I have one last question to ask you. Given the nature of this job and the difficulty of this job, why did you decide to run?
I decided to run for Commonwealth Attorney because obviously when Judge Mobley left, a lot of experience left that office. He was a very experienced chief law enforcement officer, prosecutor, and I feel as though I am the best candidate, that I have the best all-around experience. I know both of the other candidates and they're good people, but they do not have the experience that I have. I am a citizen of Portsmouth. I'm born and raised in Portsmouth, and I know, working in the Commonwealth Attorney, not everyone knows how important a job that is, but it's very important. So I want that office to run efficiently for our city. Without a good Commonwealth Attorney and a good Commonwealth Attorney's office, the crime is going to rise. There's going to be violent people, criminals on the street if they're not properly prosecuted. And I live here. I don't plan on leaving Portsmouth. You know, I came back to Portsmouth after college and law school, and I want this to be a safe city that people want to live in, visit, and without a good Commonwealth Attorney, you're not going to have that. I know it's going to be difficult. I know that I'm going to have to make hard choices. I'm sure there will be people that don't like any of my decisions, some of my decisions, but that's okay because that's what it requires. And I just feel as though with my overall experience as a prosecutor, criminal defense attorney, office manager, that I will be able to run that office in an appropriate manner to keep our city safe. I'm dedicated to my career, and this is the next level. I want to go back to where I began, which was prosecuting and helping the citizens. And that is why I chose to run for this position, because I think that I'm the best candidate with the overall experience. And I look forward to helping my city like I've always done.
Great, okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes, it was a pleasure listening to you so calmly answer all the questions completely. And I hope that many citizens will go to YouTube, PortsmouthCityWatch.org, and take advantage of listening to you support yourself and to all the questions that you've answered that will give them the knowledge that you would be a good candidate for our position. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.